Hey everyone, I'm Steve, and this is the American Garage.
This time, on the American Garage, Steve tackles the task of rebuilding the engine on the David Bradley. Andrea drops by to lend a hand. All this and more coming up on the American Garage.
Okay, so far we've taken the valves out of the engine. Andrea was here and helping us out with that. And we're ready to finish taking the engine apart. Remember, what we've got to do is we've got to take the rings out of the piston, okay? Now, I'm going to show you some things while we're in there, but this is not going to be that difficult of a task. Now, we're going to be inspecting the inside of the engine while we're in there, make sure everything looks good, and if it's not, we'll have to get new parts. But I'll show you what we're looking for. That apart. Alright, so there goes the bottom of the engine. Still has a little bit of oil in it. We'll clean that up. Let's set that aside. Here's our gasket to it. Now, Andrea is going to show us in just a little bit how to make new gaskets, because with paper gaskets we can make them ourselves. There are some kinds of gaskets we cannot make ourselves though, like the head gaskets. And since this was an old engine, we had a hard time finding a head gasket. We found a source later on. I'll get to that in a minute. But we found a gasket making company in Deer Park called Ameriflex, and Sherry over there at Ameriflex hooked us up and they made us a custom-made head gasket. We couldn't make this ourselves because we don't have this kind of material, but they have the special machines to cut these since they're a gasket making company. So thanks to all the people at Ameriflex for contributing to our project. So anyway, now we have a good head gasket, and we're going to continue. Let me continue taking the engine apart. Now, we got the bottom off of it, and what we've got here is we've got to loosen the connecting rod from the crankshaft. Okay, but I think we're going to be able to leave the crankshaft in place, and I hope so. But let's see how it goes. Okay. You know what? I almost forgot to put some gloves on. Why don't I put some gloves on before I get too dirty? There we go. Now let's continue this operation here. Okay, there's that. Okay, the bolts to the connecting rod. And they got this handy dandy little piece of metal that we had to bend down. That's what locks it in place. Okay. And the back side of the connecting rod. That goes with it. We'll keep these together. So, we've got our piston disconnected from the crankshaft. Now, I can turn it over and I can just push it on through. It should come right out. And there we are. And there's our piston. Now, let's look at it real quick. Now, the main thing we were concerned about is that these piston rings were no good anymore. And I'm thinking that that is the case because this top one is kind of stuck on one side a little bit. Okay? As a matter of fact, it's stuck pretty good. So, so now we've got brand new rings, and that'll probably make for, that'll fix our compression problem. And there comes the top ring. So we'll set that one right there. Now, okay, this is for the people who have never taken one of these apart, okay? The ring has a gap in it, okay? So when we put them back together, we want to make sure we do not line the gaps up, because if we do, we're going to have an oil leak, okay? It's going to burn oil, and it won't hold compression. So we turn them different ways so that all the gaps don't line up. There's the second one. Okay, Okay, that's number 3. Okay, top, middle, and bottom. Now, our piston looks pretty nice, but it does have a little bit of like a glazing all over it because, you know, oil over the years is going to do that. So we're going to clean it up a little bit, as well as the inside of the cylinder and the top where the head gets connected. I want all this to be nice and clean and smooth. Now, if we look inside the cylinder, I notice there's some places where I've got a dark ring going around this way. Now, what I'm supposing is that's where the engine sat for a long time and the rings got stuck there. Okay, so it left a little mark. Now, because I feel with my finger and I see that there's no scoring, there's no scratches, it's going to be beautiful. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to clean up the inside. Now, if you have a mechanic shop, you've got a nice little hone that you can put on the end of a drill and hone it out real nicely, and that cleans all that stuff off. But the other way of going about it is with some Scotch-Brite and some WD-40, because we always want to lubricate whenever we're doing something like this. Now, let me turn it so you can see it. Now, what I'm looking for is, one, the shiny surfaces where the connecting rod goes. Those are machine surfaces. They have a little bearing on them. I want to make sure those bearings are in good shape. And what I'm looking for on the crankshaft itself is scratches or pitting or looking like gravel got in there or something. That would tell me that that piece is no longer any good. We'd have to either remachine it or get a new crank. Okay? But I'm looking at it and it's nice and smooth and shiny. So that tells me it's A-okay. So I don't have to take this apart, thank goodness. Okay? So at least we've got that part already taken care of for us. There's nothing wrong, let's now fix it. Okay? So let me set this over here for a minute and let's look at our piston again. Okay, so now I'm also looking in the top of the piston to see if there's any little craters or any pits. Okay, if an engine detonates, and what that means is the fuel does not burn evenly inside and it explodes. And you think, well, it explodes in an engine. No, it doesn't. Okay, the fuel must burn smoothly. Okay, it happens so rapidly we think of it as an explosion, but in reality it's a clean, smooth burn. If it doesn't, if it detonates, if it explodes, it's going to leave little craters in the top of the piston. It's eventually going to ruin the piston and ruin the engine. Okay, so that is not the case. It's nice and smooth. So what we're going to do with this one now is we're just going to clean it up. Alright, so first of all, I'm going to use some WD-40 and a Scotch-Brite pad. I got a Scotch-Brite pad right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the WD-40 like I would soap or something. We don't want to put soap on here, but we do want to clean it up. Get all the varnish off from the oils. Okay, that's looking a lot better. Now we're going to do the same thing to the inside of the cylinder wall. I'll just keep using just a little bit of WD-40 just to keep it lubricated and also to help wash the dirt away as we go through this process. Now, how do we tell if the valve is worn or not and need grinding? Let me tell you. Now you see that there's this angled surface. As it goes in and sits in the hole, it sits on that angled surface. Now, when valves get worn out or worn, they develop a groove in that flat surface. So you got like a little step in there. Now, if you see a little step on there, it will look something like this. Alright, now you see what I'm talking about? It's got that little groove in there. Now, since this one does not have a groove around there, I think that this one is going to be just fine. So it's ready to go back in now that it's been cleaned up. Okay, so let's review what we've got done so far. Okay, we took the piston out of the engine after we disassembled it. Of course, the valves are out as well. What we discovered we needed is we needed new rings and we needed new gaskets. So we have our new rings, we have our new gaskets. We've cleaned the inside of the cylinder and the valve seats. We've cleaned the valves. We've cleaned the piston. Now we're ready to start putting it back together. Got all our parts? So here we go. The first thing we're going to do is let's put the piston back in the engine. Now before we do that, we've got to get our brand new piston rings. Now, we got our piston rings. These were hard to find as well. But when we found them, we found a source for all the things we would need. We would have been able to get a head gasket as well, but you know, Ameriflex made us this great gasket, so we thought, no need. Okay? So, we've got these new old stock piston rings from Bob's Small Engine Repair up in Iowa. We found Bob. He's been very instrumental in helping us to find the right parts we need for our engines. And I've got 3 nice rings. Now it's ready to go in. Now what we'll do is we will drop it into the cylinder. Let me bring my engine over here where I can get at it. First we'll put just a little bit of oil. Surface is coated real nice. Okay. Now with that done, I'm going to drop my piston in. But before we do, remember we said we want to make sure that the grooves are not lined up. You may be wondering, how are we going to get it in there with these new rings? Okay? We can't really squeeze it with our hands. So I have a special tool made specially for this. It's called a ring compressor. Now, they come in different shapes and sizes. And this is the one that I have. Now, it's pretty big right now because we were using it on a much larger engine. Now, we scrunched down the ring compressor all the way, and what we've discovered is this ring compressor is too large for our piston. We can't get it small enough to make a good squeeze on the rings on this small piston. So I was thinking, how am I going to do this? I couldn't find another small ring compressor, and I didn't want to go to the specialty tool store. And I got my brain to thinking, and the solution I came up with is rather simple. And this is the solution right here. A hose clamp. Hose clamp is going to, so I got a 2-inch hose clamp because it's a 2-inch piston, and this will be able to use to squeeze down the rings to get it in there, and it's just the right size for this little piston, okay? And this is a $2 solution, so that's always a good thing, right? I'm going to make sure I use plenty of oil on this as we go together. Okay, now I'm going to, with plenty of oil on there, I'm just going to squeeze this hose clamp down. Now that should be about enough to compress my rings. Now let's see if we can tap it on through. And there we are, folks. We've got our piston back in the engine. Okay, now I've got the connecting rod lined up with the crankshaft. All I've got to do is put the other side of the connecting rod on there, and it'll be back in place. Now, from here out, it's just a reverse order of what we did. I'm going to reconnect the connecting rod, then I'm going to put the bottom back on the motor, And then I'm going to put the valves back in their spots and put the top on the engine. So the next thing after all of that is going to be to do a compression test and see how our new rings are doing for us. Now, while I'm doing this, since you've already watched us tear it all apart, why don't you watch Andrea for a little bit, and she's going to show you how to make gaskets.
Today we're making a gasket for the bottom of the engine. First thing you want to do is get your gasket paper ready, and you want to make a template that you can use to cut it out. What I'm going to do is spray paint the edges, just the edges, very lightly, and then I will put it on here and make a stamp, and that will give me a guideline to cut out the gasket. Don't go too crazy with the paint. Give it a little spray all the way around. Press down good. It's best to work on as flat of a surface as possible when you're doing this. And there we have it. Okay, now that the paint's dried a little bit, you can go ahead and cut part of it out with scissors. Cut the bigger sections off. Be careful not to cut inside the lines of the gasket. It's okay if it's bigger. It's much easier to trim off excess than to basically start all over again if you cut into the interior part of the gasket. All of the curves and the circular parts, we can cut those out with stamps. We have circular stamps here that you can line up to the size of the hole that you're trying to create. Use a piece of scrap gasket paper to give yourself a little bit of cushion for the stamp to go through. Perfect. And again on the other side. Voila. Now the inner corners of the outside, you can again use your stamp to carve out the corners and then finish it up with an X-Acto knife. Carefully remove the inside piece so you don't tear the gasket. There you go. Now I just need to poke the two holes on the side with the smallest of the stamps. Ta-da! All done. Okay, when we were working on the motor, we noticed that the gasket that goes to the faceplate of the valve cover was broken. So what I'm going to do right now is make a new gasket for this. And all I'm going to do is take a scrap of gasket paper that was left from the other one and put my broken gasket directly on there and just spray paint myself a template like this. Very quickly so it doesn't move. There. And give it a minute to dry, and then we'll come and cut it out. And there we go. Pretty much the same size and shape as the original gasket. And that is how you make a gasket.
Thanks, Andrea. Now, as you can see, while you were watching Andrea make gaskets, I had finished putting the engine back together. We put the valves back in, we put the bottom of the engine back on, we put the head back on with our gasket from Ameriflex, and I attached the compression tester. So I'm ready right now to run a compression test, and let's see how we did. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just wrap a rope around the spinner and give it a pull, and let's see how our compression came out. Wow, that's good compression. Feels good. All right. Excellent. We got our compression up. The engine's good and strong now, and I can feel it when I try to turn it. It gives me a lot of good resistance when we go through the compression stroke. So, we got our engine ready. Let's move on to the next step. Paint the engine and all the parts and get ready to reassemble the David Bradley. This concludes part 2 of the engine rebuild episode. Here I showed you how to finish rebuilding the engine, and in the last part, part 3, we will cover how to recondition the transmission.